The last beam went in low, near the floor, where no one would ever see it. Noah pressed it with the heel of his hand and listened. Wood against wood, pitch already dry. Outside, the wind moved across the plain the way it had moved for 100 years, patient, indifferent, smelling faintly of grain smoke from the town. A child laughed somewhere beyond the fence. A donkey complained. A woman called a name that was not his. He stood up slowly. His knees were old now. The ark rose above him in 3 decks, longer than the longest field in the valley, wider than any house anyone in the region had ever built. For a long time, the neighbors had come on feast days to see it and to mock it. Lately, they had stopped coming. The joke had worn thin. A man who builds the same impossible thing for a century becomes, eventually, part of the landscape. A strange hill people walk around without looking up. Shem came down the ramp with a coil of rope across his shoulder. He did not speak. None of them spoke much in those last weeks. Words had been spent. For 100 years, his father had preached in the marketplace, in the doorways, at weddings he was not invited to. The text would later remember him as a herald of righteousness, 2 Peter 2:5. But heralds are only heralds while there are still ears. By the final season, Noah had stopped speaking to the town. He spoke only to the wood and to God, and sometimes to the animals as they came. They had been coming for days. A pair of doves had appeared first, settling on the rail without fear, as though they had been told where to go. Then the unclean creatures, 2 by 2, and the clean by 7s, at Genesis 7:2. Oxen with mud on their flanks. A pair of lions that did not look at the oxen. Foxes, hawks, something heavy and slow that none of them had a name for. They came down the road in a line that did not break, and the people of the town came out to watch and laughed, and then grew quiet, and then went back to their dinners. Noah's wife counted them. She had a small piece of clay and a stick, and she marked them in pairs, the way a shepherd marks a flock. When she finished, she sat down on the ramp and did not get up for a long time. There were 8 adults: Noah, his wife, Shem, Ham, Japheth, their 3 wives, no children, no grandchildren, no cousin who had repented at the last hour, no neighbor who had finally believed. The list had not grown in 100 years of preaching, and it would not grow now. Japheth's wife asked, once very quietly, whether anyone else was coming. No one answered her. The door of the ark was still open. It had been open for as long as the ark had existed. Anyone in the valley could have walked up the ramp on any afternoon of the last century and asked what the wood was for. Some had. They had laughed and gone home. The door was a door. A door is by nature an invitation. For 100 years that invitation had stood in the open air, and the rain it warned of had not come, and so the warning had become a kind of decoration, something the children climbed on when their mothers were not watching. That evening, Noah walked the length of the ark one last time. He checked the cages, he checked the food, he checked the seam where the upper deck met the roof, where he had worried about a leak for 30 years, and never been entirely sure. He stood for a moment by the door, looking out at the valley where the sun was sliding down behind the low hills, turning the dust on the road the color of old bronze. A man on a cart waved at him from the road. Noah raised his hand in return. The man laughed and drove on. Then Noah went inside, and his sons came in after him, and the door, for the first time in 100 years, began to close. Chapter 2: 7 days of sunlight. The morning after the door closed, the sun rose exactly as it had risen the day before. This was the first cruelty. Noah's wife was the first to notice it. She climbed to the small square window near the roof and looked out and saw the same valley, the same road, the same smoke from the same cooking fires. A woman she knew by sight was carrying water from the well. A boy was driving goats. The sky was the pale, clean blue of an ordinary morning in the dry season. She came down the ladder and said nothing. The command had been simple. 7 days and the rain would come. Genesis 7:4. 7 days. Not 7 hours, not a single roar of judgment that very night. 7 full days, each with its own dawn and its own dusk, each with its own ordinary smell of bread and dust, each with its own chance for a knock on the side of the ark that would never come. On the 2nd day, the neighbors came back. They had heard, somehow, that the door had been shut. They stood at the foot of the ramp and shouted up at the hull, and at first they were laughing. Was Noah well? Had the great prophet finally lost what was left of his mind? Had he sealed himself inside his hill of wood with his sons and his beasts because he could no longer bear the weight of being wrong? The voices were familiar. Noah knew most of them by name. He sat on a wooden bench just inside the door and did not answer. His wife sat beside him. Ham wanted to call back, to argue, to defend. His father put a hand on his arm and shook his head once, slowly. The voices outside grew bolder when no answer came. Someone threw a stone against the hull. It made a sound like a small drum. Someone else laughed. After a while they grew bored, the way crowds grow bored of a man who will not perform, and they drifted back to the town. On the 3rd day, a different kind of visitor came. A woman. She walked up the ramp slowly, as though she were not entirely sure why she was doing it. She stopped at the closed door and stood there for a long time. She did not knock. She did not call out. She only stood, with one hand half raised, as though deciding whether to raise it the rest of the way. Inside, Noah heard her breathing. He did not move. He could not have opened the door if he had wanted to. The bolt was not his. Something older than the bolt had been set against it. After what seemed a very long time, the woman lowered her hand and turned and walked back down the ramp, and Noah did not see her again. The 4th day was a wedding day. They could hear the music from the town, faint, threading up through the still air. A flute, a small drum, voices raised in old songs. Someone, somewhere down there, was being given in marriage. Someone was eating, drinking, planning a harvest, choosing a name for a child not yet born. Many centuries later, a teacher in Galilee would describe these very days. Eating, drinking, marrying, and being given in marriage, until the day Noah entered the ark. And they did not know until the flood came and took them all away. Matthew 24:38-39. The teacher would not need to invent the detail. The detail was already there in the wind, drifting up from the valley, the sound of an ordinary wedding under a perfectly clear sky. By the 5th day, Noah had stopped going to the small window. His wife asked him once why God had waited. He did not answer for a long time. When he did, his voice was low and not bitter. He said the door was still open in a way she could not see. He said 7 days was not nothing. He said 100 years had not been nothing either. And that grace did not stop being grace, simply because no one came to claim it. She did not argue with him. She had been married to him long enough to know that some answers were also prayers. On the 6th day, a thin film of cloud appeared in the west. Only Japheth saw it. He came down from the window and did not mention it to anyone. The cloud was so faint that a man, looking straight at it, might have decided he was imagining things. By evening, it was gone again, and the sky was clean. On the 7th day, no one in the valley looked up. Chapter 3 Sagather is a Hebrew verb the text uses for what God did to the door. It is not the ordinary word for closing. It is not the word a woman uses when she shuts a kitchen door against the dust, or the word a shepherd uses when he draws the gate of a pen at evening. The verb is sagar, and the text is careful with it. The Lord shut him in. Genesis 7:16. Not Noah, not his sons, not the elders of any house, the Lord. A door that the Lord shuts is not the same kind of door. In other places where the verb appears, it carries the weight of something irreversible. It is used in Isaiah of a kingdom whose gate the Lord will open, and what he opens no one will shut, and what he shuts no one will open. Isaiah 22:22. It is used in Job of cosmic boundaries, of the sea hemmed in behind doors when it broke forth from the womb. Job 38:8. It is the verb of finalities, of judgments that no committee of men can revisit, no army can force, No eloquence can persuade. This is the verb the text chooses for the ark. Noah did not seal the door. Noah could not have sealed the door. The pitch on its frame was his work. The bolt was his work. The great wooden bar that fit across its inner face was his work. But the act that fixed the door against the coming water, the act that turned a piece of carpentry into a boundary between two worlds, that act belonged to God alone. There is a debate among readers about where God was when he did this. Some have said he stood outside the ark, like a man, closing a stable behind a flock, locking the family in with his own hand on the latch. Some have said he was inside, and that what was closed from within, and that the one who saved Noah saved him by entering the same vessel. The text does not settle the question. Perhaps the text refuses to settle it on purpose. A God who is wholly outside is a judge. A God who is wholly inside is a fellow traveler. The flood story will not let him be only one or the other. What the text does settle is the irreversibility. Once Sagar has been spoken over a door, the door is no longer a door. It becomes a wall with a memory of being a door. It remembers as a wall that it once opened. It remembers that men walked through it, and animals walked through it, and prophets stood beside it preaching for 100 years. It remembers being an invitation. But it is not an invitation anymore. Inside the ark, Noah heard the bolt slide. He would later tell his sons that he did not see a hand. He only heard the sound, a single, dry, definitive click in the wood, like the closing of a book that no one in the family had been reading aloud. The light at the edge of the great doorway dimmed and then was gone, as though something heavier than wood had settled against the frame. His wife was beside him. She did not weep. She did not speak. She put her hand flat against the door and held it there for a long moment, as though she were saying goodbye to someone she had loved very much. For 370 days, that door would not move. The mockers of the town would not be able to move it. The strong men of the valley, had they come at last, would not have been able to move it. Noah himself, had he wished in some hour of pity to slide back the bolt and call out to a child clinging to a roof, Noah could not have moved it. The verb had been spoken. The door was sealed in the only way a door can be sealed by the one who made wood in the first place. And the 7 days were over. Chapter 4, The First Crack. In the 8th day did not begin with rain. It began with a smell. A man in the lower town stepped out of his house at first light to fetch water and stopped on the threshold. The air had changed. It had the faint metallic odor of a thing about to burn, though nothing was burning. The hair on his arms rose. His wife, behind him, asked what was wrong. He did not know how to answer her. He looked toward the east, where the sun should already have been clearing the hills, and saw, instead, a thin dark line drawn across the sky from horizon to horizon, low and exact, as though someone had pulled a charcoal string across the morning. He had never seen such a line before. A dog began to howl down the lane. Another joined it. Within a minute, every dog in the lower town was howling, not barking, not warning, but lifting a long ragged note that had no purpose any of them would have been able to name. Birds rose suddenly from the roofs and circled and would not settle. A donkey screamed. The man called his wife out into the street and pointed. The dark line had thickened. It was no longer a line. It was a low wall of cloud, moving without wind, advancing in a way clouds do not advance. The light around it had a yellow cast, sickly, like the light inside an old bruise. The smell of metal grew stronger. His wife began to cry. She did not know why. She gripped his sleeve and said the name of a child who was still asleep inside the house. In the upper town, an old woman who had once heard Noah preach in the marketplace stepped out of her doorway and looked toward the great hill of wood at the edge of the valley. She had laughed at him then. She remembered laughing. She remembered a particular afternoon, a hot one, when she had stood with her sister at the well, and they had repeated his sentences back to each other in a high, mocking voice, and laughed until they had to sit down. She remembered her sister. Her sister had died 10 years ago of a fever. The old woman walked slowly in the direction of the ark. She was not the only one. Across the valley that morning, small figures could be seen moving along the roads. Not many. The town was large. The figures were few. But here and there, a man on foot, a woman with a child on her hip, a young man running, all of them angling, without speaking to one another, toward the same enormous wooden hill that they had laughed at all their lives. It was not faith that moved them. It was the smell. The first drop fell on the ark roof at the 3rd hour of the morning. Noah heard it. A single heavy strike against the pitched timber above his head, loud as a fist. Then another. Then a sound like grain being poured from a great height into an empty jar, steady, even, gathering, until it became a roar. Inside, the animals went quiet first and then began to call. The lions paced, the oxen shifted. A horse somewhere on the middle deck struck the wood of its stall once with a hoof and then stood still. But the rain, terrible as it was not yet the worst thing. The worst thing came from below. Chapter 5 Tehom Remembrance text is careful about the order. It does not say the rain came first and the deep followed. It says the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and after that, the windows of heaven were opened. Genesis 7:11. The deep came first. The sky followed. Whatever was about to happen above the world was answered and outdone by what was about to happen beneath it. The Hebrew word for that deep is Tehom. It is an old word, older than the flood. The first time it appears in the Bible, it is in the 2nd verse of Genesis, when the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Genesis 1:2, before the light, before the firmament, before the dry land. Tehom is what was there before anything was there. It is the primordial water, the chaos beneath creation, the silence that God spoke into. On the first day of creation, God did not destroy Tehom. He set boundaries against it. On the 2nd day, he divided the waters above the firmament from the waters below. Genesis 1:6-7. He did not annihilate the deep, he commanded it. He held it back the way a man holds back a flood by raising a wall. On the 8th day of the 7, the walls came down. The fountains of the great deep were broken up. The verb is violent. Something tore open. Something that had been held shut since the 2nd day of the world, unclenched all at once. And the water that creation had been keeping in its proper place came up through the ground. Witnesses on the high places of the valley saw it happen. A spring near the lower town, which had run thin and clear for as long as anyone remembered, suddenly leapt out of the ground in a column the height of 3 men. The earth around it bulged and split. Water came up not as water comes from a well, but as if pushed from beneath by a hand that would not stop pushing. In the river to the east, the current reversed. The riverbed split lengthwise, and the water that had been flowing south began to climb out of its banks in both directions, going where rivers do not go. This was not weather. This was the 2nd day of creation being undone. Above, the windows of heaven opened, and the waters that had been divided from the deep at the beginning of the world came down to find them again. The 2 seas, the one above and the one below, had been separated by a single command. Now they were running toward each other like lovers who had been kept apart for too long, and everything that lived between them was caught in their meeting. The text has its own word for this meeting, Mabul. It is a word used almost nowhere else. The Hebrew Bible has many words for floods, for rivers in spate, for the wadi swollen by spring rain. None of them are used here. The text refuses the ordinary vocabulary. It coins or borrows from somewhere very old, a word that belongs only to this event Mabul, the cosmic undoing. The flood that is not a flood in any ordinary sense, not a season, not a weather, not a natural disaster, but a reversal of creation itself. When the New Testament reaches for this story, it remembers the word's strangeness. Peter writes that the world that then existed with water, 2 Peter 3:6, the world that then existed. Not a city, not a kingdom, a world. Mabul is what ends worlds. Inside the ark, Noah felt the floor lift. It was a strange sensation, slow at first. The great wooden hull, which had stood on its blocks for 100 years, settled, groaned, shifted, and then, all at once, was no longer on the ground. The blocks were gone. The earth was gone. There was only the water beneath, lifting them, the way a hand lifts a small object from a table. His wife reached for the post beside her, without looking at it. The animals on the lower deck went quiet, as though listening. They were afloat. Chapter 6 Order of Drowning. The text remembers the order in which the creatures died. It does not have to. A simpler verse could have said, all flesh perished and moved on. But the text slows down. It walks through the categories the way a man walks through the rooms of a burning house, naming each one. All flesh died that moved on the earth, both of fowl, and of cattle, and of beast, and of every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. And Genesis 7:21, fowl, cattle, beast, creeping thing, man. This is the 6th day in reverse. On the 6th day, the Lord made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and cattle, and every creeping thing. And then he made man, the last and the crown. Genesis 1:24-27. The order of creation moved from the simpler to the more complex, from the earthbound to the image-bearing. The order of drowning moves the other way. The birds go first, torn from the sky, soaked, falling, the cattle next, with no high places left to climb to. Then the wild beasts, then the creeping things. Last the man. It is not a coincidence. The flood is not simply killing creatures. It is unweaving them. It is reading the 6th chapter of Genesis backwards, and before it is finished, it will reach further back than the 6th day. It will reach back to the 2nd day, where the waters were divided, and back to the 1st, where the deep waited. The text uses a phrase for what died that is older than any of these categories, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life. Genesis 7:22. The breath of the Spirit of life. Nishmat Ruach Chaim. It is almost exactly the phrase used in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, when the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Genesis 2:7. The very breath that had been given by God's mouth at the beginning was now being withdrawn. This is what is dying in the flood. Not flesh only. Breath outside the ark. The high places of the valley were filling. A man stood on the roof of his house and watched the water climb the wall below him. He had carried his youngest son up to the roof an hour earlier. The boy was very quiet. The water reached the eaves and slowed for a moment as though deciding, and then began to rise again. The man held his son's face against his shoulder so that the boy would not see. On a hill to the north, 3 men who had run from the lower town stood at the highest point they could find. The hill was not high enough. They had argued, on the way up, about whose fault it was. Now they did not speak. One of them looked toward the east and saw, in the grey light, the great wooden hull of the ark riding above the water far across the valley, small as a fingernail at that distance, intact. He sat down on the hill and put his head in his hands. In a grove of old trees on the western slope, a woman was helping her mother climb. The mother was very old. The water was already among the roots of the trees. The woman did not know why she was climbing. She knew the trees would not save them. She climbed anyway. There was nothing else to do. The text does not describe these scenes. The text is restrained. It says only that the waters increased, and increased, and increased, and the ark went upon the face of the waters, and the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. Genesis 7:18-19. But the order of drowning is there in the verse, and it is exact. First the birds, then the cattle, then the beasts, then the creeping things, then last, the image of God. Chapter 7a, family at the Huldah, was a man in the lower town named for a star. The text does not name him. The text names only Noah and his household. Everyone else is left in the great anonymous chorus of all flesh. But there were such men. There must have been. 100 years is enough time for a son to grow up hearing Noah preach in the marketplace, and to repeat his sentences to his own son, and to be, for most of his life, almost persuaded. This man, call him a man, had once been almost persuaded. He remembered the morning of the 8th day, the way Noah had looked the last time he had walked past him in the road. It had been perhaps a year ago. Noah had been carrying a length of rope across his shoulder, going up the hill toward the unfinished ark, and he had stopped briefly when their eyes met. He had not said anything. He had only looked at the man, looked at him. The man would remember with a kind of patient, exhausted hope, and then walked on. The man had gone home and laughed about it at dinner. Now, on the morning of the 8th day, he stood in the courtyard of his house with the rain coming down in sheets, and the courtyard already a shallow pond, and he could not remember what had been so funny. His wife was inside, trying to gather the children. They had 3. The youngest was still small enough to be carried. The eldest was nearly a man himself, tall, frightened, not yet sure whether to act like a child or a soldier. The middle one, a daughter, was 8 years old and very quiet. He told them to come. He did not say where. He did not need to, the ark. They went out of the house, into the rain, without taking anything. The water in the lane was already to the ankles. The man carried the youngest. The eldest carried the daughter on his back. His wife held to his belt. They walked, and then they ran, splashing through water that grew deeper with every step. By the time they reached the edge of the town, the lane was a river. By the time they reached the open ground beyond the town, the river was a lake. The rain came in waves now, not falling but driving, as though the air itself had become hostile. The smell of metal was so thick the man could taste it. He could not see the ark. He knew the direction. He had walked it many times. He had stood more than once in his younger years at the foot of the ramp and listened to Noah speaking from the upper deck. He had once put his hand on the pitch of the great hull and felt it warm in the sun. He knew where it was. He could not see it. The water was at his waist now. He pushed forward. His wife stumbled, and he caught her with the hand that was not holding the child. The eldest son shouted something he could not hear. The rain ate the sound. Somewhere off to the left, a roof gave way with a long, splintering groan. He thought, as he forced his legs through the water, about all the afternoons when the door had been open. The door had been open his entire life. The door had been open his father's entire life. The door had been open for 100 years, and he had walked past it perhaps 1,000 times. And on every one of those afternoons, he had been free to walk up the ramp and ask a question and be answered. He had not asked. He had been busy. He had been planning. He had been planning, in particular, a marriage for his eldest son next spring. A marriage to a girl whose father owned good land east of the river. The good land east of the river was under 20 feet of water. When at last he saw the ark, a darker shape against the dark grey of the rain, enormous, riding high, he was almost too tired to be glad. He shouted. He shouted his sons' names. He shouted Noah's name. He pushed forward through the rising water, and at last his outstretched hand met the curve of the pitched hull, slick, warm with rain. There was no door. There had been a door. He knew there had been a door. He had stood at it as a young man. He felt along the hull, his palm flat against the wood, moving sideways, the child crying against his shoulder. His wife was beside him now, her hand also on the hull, the eldest son with the daughter on his back. His palm passed over the place where the door had been. The seam was still there. He could feel it under his fingers, a long faint line in the pitch, perfectly sealed, perfectly smooth. There was no handle, there was no gap, there was no bolt that a man's hand could turn. The door was a door only in memory. He struck the hull once with his fist. The sound was small. The rain ate it. He struck it again and again. He shouted his old neighbor's name, Noah, Noah. He shouted that he was sorry. He shouted that his wife was here, his children were here, that the youngest was only 2 years old, that the daughter had never harmed anyone, that the eldest had not yet had a chance to live. He shouted things he had not known he believed. Inside, Noah heard him. Noah heard all of them. Chapter 8 Vitha is a verb the text uses for the deaths. It is not the ordinary verb for dying. The ordinary verb is mut. It is a clean word. A man falls in battle. Mut. A king grows old and his time comes. Mut. It is the word that fills the genealogies of Genesis, repeating at the end of each long life like a slow drumbeat. The flood does not use mut. The flood uses vayikva. He expired. He breathed his last. He gave up the breath. The same verb the text will use much later of Abraham at the end of his good old age, Genesis 25:8, and of Isaac and of Jacob, patriarchs dying in their beds, gathered to their people. The verb is gentle. It is the verb of a final, quiet exhalation. To use it of the flood is to do something the text does not have to do. It is to refuse to treat the drowning of a world as a mass extinction. It is to insist that every one of those deaths was, in the eyes of the text, a personal last breath, not a statistic, not a category. A vayikva. The medieval commentators noticed this. Rashi noticed it. Ramban noticed it. The text could have said they perished. The text could have said they were destroyed. The text said they expired. The text said they breathed their last. The text gave them, in the moment of judgment, the verb usually reserved for the righteous dead. This is not sentimentality. This is the gravity of the page. Outside the ark, on the 8th day and the 9th, vayikva was happening hundreds of thousands of times. A grandmother in a high room of a house that was filling with water below her. A blacksmith in the market square who had laughed at Noah once and forgotten that he had laughed. A young woman who had been to a wedding 4 days ago and had thought, fleetingly, on the way home, about the dark hill of wood at the edge of the valley. A man whose palm was still pressed against the seam of a door that was no longer a door. His wife was beside him. The water reached his chin and then his mouth. He held his youngest son above his head as long as he could. The eldest had already gone under, with the daughter still on his back, swept by a sudden current from the broken river to the east. The wife was crying without sound. Her tears were nothing against the rain. The man tipped his head back. He kept the child above the water for a few seconds longer. He thought, very clearly, about an afternoon when he had been 12 years old, and his father had taken him past the ark and pointed at it, and said, "That man is mad, do you understand me? That man is mad." He thought about the way his father had laughed. He thought about the way he had laughed, in turn, at his own children, repeating the joke. He did not pray. He did not have time. The water rose another hand's width, and the child slipped, and he lunged for the child, and the current took them both. Vayikva. He breathed his last. The text does not name him. The text does not have to. The verb is enough. The verb is the dignity the text gives him in the only line of his story it ever tells. He was not slaughtered. He was not erased. He breathed his last, the way Abraham would breathe his last under a tree. At the edge of a field his sons would one day buy for a grave. Inside the ark, the sound of fists on the hull had stopped. There was only the rain and the deep and the dark. Chapter 9. No did not sleep. A tradition older than the synagogues holds that Noah, in the year of the flood, did not sleep. Not literally, perhaps. The body must sleep, but the tradition is not making a claim about hours. It is making a claim about a soul. In the year inside the ark, Noah's rest was broken. He did not eat his bread the way he had eaten it before. He carried, the rabbis said, the weight of every voice he had heard outside the hull on the 8th day, and every voice he had not heard, and every voice that had been silent for 100 years. The text does not say this directly. The text says only that Noah and his sons and their wives went into the ark, and the Lord shut him in. Genesis 7:13-16. After that, for a long stretch of verses, Noah is not described at all. He is a presence inside a vessel. The vessel rises, drifts, settles. He is the silent center, but the silence is full. The middle deck of the Ark was where his family kept their living space. 8 adults in a wooden world the length of a small town, surrounded by animals on 3 decks, lit by a single great window above. They had food enough for a year. They had work enough. The animals required feeding twice each day, and water and cleaning and watching. The work was a mercy. It filled the hands. It did not fill the ears. On the morning of the 4th day, inside the flood, Shem found his father at the rail of the middle deck, looking up through the window at a sky he could not see. He did not interrupt him. He stood at a little distance and waited. After a long while, Noah said, quietly, that he had heard a child. Shem did not ask what he meant. The sound was not literal by then. By the 4th day, there was no flesh left outside the Ark with breath enough to strike a hull. But the sound stayed in Noah. It would stay in him, the tradition says, for the rest of his life. There is a kind of memory that does not need its object to be present to keep working. Noah had heard fists on the hull on the morning of the 8th day, and voices, and at least one woman who had called out a name that might have been her child's. And he had not been able to open the door. He could not have opened the door. The verb sagar had been spoken, and yet he was the only human inside that hull who would have to remember for the rest of his years that he had been close enough to hear. There was no consolation that erased this. The tradition does not pretend there was. It does not say God comforted Noah immediately. It does not say angels came and explained the necessity. It says simply that Noah did not sleep. The flood was not, for Noah, an escape. It was a passage through grief. His wife understood this. She did not, in the year of the Ark, ask him to be lighter than he was. She did the work beside him. She fed the animals. She kept the bread oven going on its small stone in the corner of the lower deck. She sang sometimes quietly when she thought no one was listening. Old songs from the valley. Songs whose other singers were gone. The sons argued sometimes. 8 adults in a wooden world for a year and 10 days will argue. Ham wanted to climb to the upper deck more often than his father thought wise. Japheth was prone to long silences that frightened his wife. Shem prayed too loudly for his brother's comfort. They quarreled about water rations once and were ashamed afterward. Noah did not raise his voice at them. He had no voice for raising. He carried his own grief and did not load his sons with it. He kept a small clay tablet on which he marked the days. 40 marks for the rain, 150 marks for the prevailing of the waters. Then a long, slow tally as the waters began, almost imperceptibly, to recede. The marks were small and even and patient. They were the only writing he did inside the Ark. He did not compose a psalm. He did not write a history of what had happened. He did not, so far as anyone could tell, compose a single sentence of theology. He counted the days. When at last, on a morning that was not different from other mornings in the dim wooden light, the Ark stopped moving, when there was a long, low scraping sound from below, and a settling, and then stillness. Noah did not stand up immediately. He sat where he was. He listened. There was no fist on the hull. There had been no fist on the hull for many months. The silence of the world outside was almost total now. The rain had stopped a long time ago. Only the wind moved and the slow slap of water on wood. After a while, Noah stood up and went to find his wife. The Ark, the text would later say, came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat. Genesis 8:4. Chapter 10:15. Cubits above the mountain text is specific about the height of the water. It says the waters prevailed 15 cubits upward, and the mountains were covered. Genesis 7:20. 15 cubits is about 7 meters, 23 feet. The exact figure is not random. The Ark was 30 cubits high. Genesis 6:15. 15 is half of 30. The Ark, in other words, was floating exactly half its height above the highest mountain, half submerged, half above, half in the world of the deep, half in the world of the air. The vessel of salvation rode the seam between two creations, the one that was ending and the one that had not yet been spoken back into being. The detail is small. It is the kind of detail a careless reader misses. But the text places it deliberately, like a craftsman placing a single nail at exactly the right point in a joint. Above every mountain of the earth, there was now 7 meters of water. This is what totality looks like in numbers. It does not mean the water was 7 meters deep across the world. It means there was no high place left. Every refuge that any creature might have run to, every hill, every mountain, every peak that had been climbed by hunters in the days before the rain, every sacred high place where men had built altars to gods they had invented after forgetting the one, every one of them was beneath 7 meters of water. A man on the highest mountain in the world that morning could have lifted his hand straight up, and his fingertips would have stopped a man's height short of the air. The text does not need to dramatize this. The number does the work. 15 cubits, half the height of the ark, the exact measurement of how complete the unmaking had become. Inside the ark, Noah did not know any of these numbers. He knew only that the vessel was riding very smoothly, with no scrape, no jolt, no warning catch of timber on stone. The mountains were below him, all of them, somewhere down in the dark water. He did not know which mountains. He did not know whose. The map he had carried in his head for 90 years. The map of his valley, his country, his people, was gone. There was no valley anymore. There were no fields. The road his father had walked was a road in his memory only. His wife asked him once whether he thought there was anyone else. Noah did not answer at first. He said, after a long pause, that the Lord had not told him there was. It was, perhaps, the gentlest way he could refuse a hope he could not afford. He could not afford to imagine, in the year of the ark, that some other family on some far island had been spared. The grace of his survival had to be carried as it had been given, as the singular, exact grace of one household, narrow and merciful, and not to be expanded by his wishing. His wife nodded. She did not ask again. 15 cubits above the highest mountain, and the ark drifting at the seam. Chapter 11 Heart. That was. Grieved. There is a verse before the flood that some readers find harder than the flood itself. It says that the Lord saw the wickedness of man on the earth, and that the Lord repented that he had made man, and was grieved in his heart. Genesis 6:6. Repented. Grieved. The verbs are difficult because they are human verbs, and the one they are spoken of is not a man that he should repent, but the text uses them. It does not soften them. It does not say the Lord was displeased, or the Lord was disappointed, or the Lord found cause to act. It says he was grieved. The Hebrew is atzav, the same root that appears in the 3rd chapter of Genesis, when the woman is told she will bring forth children in atzav, in pain. Genesis 3:6. And when the man is told that in atzav he will eat of the ground all the days of his life. Genesis 3:17. The grief of the fall is the grief that returns, now, in the heart of the one who made the fallers. This is the disposition behind the flood. The flood is not, in the text's telling, the work of a God who has been waiting for a chance to break what he made. It is the work of a God who is in atzav about what he must do. He is not above the grief. He is inside it. He is, the text dares to say, grieved in his heart. Noah did not know this verse. He did not know, while the ark drifted at 15 cubits, that the writer of his story would one day put this sentence at the beginning of the chapter that told it. He knew only what he had been told, that the Lord had decided to end the violence of the earth. Genesis 6:13, that he was to build, that he was to enter, that the Lord would shut him in. But he had heard, on the morning of the 8th day, fists on the hull. He had heard, perhaps, a child. He had carried that hearing into the ark, and across the floodwaters, and to the resting on Ararat, and it would walk down off the mountain with him afterward. The tradition that grew around the flood, among the rabbis, and later among the church fathers, held that some echo of God's Atsav was carried in Noah too. That when the text says Noah did not sleep, what it means is that Noah carried the grief of the one who had decided the judgment. Not because Noah was God, but because Noah had been close enough to the door when Sagar was spoken to hear what it cost. This is the way the text wants the flood to be read, not as the work of a cold heaven punching down through clouds, as the wound of a heaven that had run out of other ways. When at last the waters began to recede, the text says God remembered Noah. Genesis 8:1 is a strange verb. God does not, in any other sense, forget. The verb does not mean he had stopped knowing where the ark was. It means he turned his face. After the long hidden grief, he turned his face back toward the vessel he had sealed with his own hand, and a wind passed over the earth, and the waters were assuaged. The fountains of the deep were stopped. The windows of heaven were closed. The rain was restrained. It was the same God on both sides of the verse. The one who opened the deep was the one who closed it. The one who shut the door was the one who in time would tell Noah to open it. The Atsav was in both motions. The judgment had been his grief, and the mercy was his grief turning back to remember. Chapter 12. Bohung Uside. Down when Noah came out of the ark, the first thing he did was build an altar. He took of every clean beast and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. Genesis 8:20. The text is careful. It says the Lord smelled a sweet savor. The Hebrew is reach hanikoch, a soothing aroma, a calming smell. The verb root has in it the idea of rest. The flood ended, in the text's grammar, with a smell that brought rest to the heart of the one who had been grieved. There is no mention here of celebration. Noah did not throw a feast. Noah did not gather his sons and lift a cup. Noah built an altar before he planted a vine, before he raised a tent, before he walked the new ground. He killed and burned. He gave back, in smoke, a portion of the breath that had been preserved. The animals that had been spared were the only ones from which he could give. The act was costly. It was almost certainly silent. Above the altar when he had finished was the bow. The text calls it a bow. The Hebrew is keshet. It is the same word the prophets and the psalmists use for the weapon of a warrior. The bow that a king bends. The bow that an army uses. The bow that, in the hand of the Lord himself, the prophets sometimes describe drawn against a guilty nation. The text does not say rainbow. The text says bow, a bow in the sky. The shape, of course, is the shape we know. The arc of color after a storm, the thing children point at. But the text is not naming a meteorological phenomenon. The text is naming a posture. A warbow has, when it is drawn, a string and an arrow, and the arrow points away from the archer toward the target. To hang a bow in the sky in the position the text describes, arc upward, ends pointing down at the earth, is to do the opposite of drawing it. It is to set the weapon down, with its string toward the ground, and its body lifted away from any possible target. It is more than a sign of peace. It is a sign of disarmament. In the picture language of the ancient world, an enemy king, having lost or having relented, sometimes hung his bow on a wall, or laid it across a threshold to signal that he would not draw it again. The bow, hung the way this bow is hung, points its string toward the earth and its open arc toward heaven. If an arrow were ever fired from such a bow, it would not strike the earth. It would strike the heart of the one who held it. The text places this picture deliberately. I do set my bow in the cloud, the Lord says, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. Genesis 9:13. And again, the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature. Genesis 9:16. The remembering is not for Noah. The remembering is for God himself. The sign is hung in the sky, the text says, so that God may look upon it and remember. This is a strange and tender grammar. The sign of mercy is for the merciful one to see. The bow is hung where God's own eye will fall on it, again and again, in every storm, so that the judgment does not return. And the bow is turned, and its string is toward the ground. If a reader follows that string with the eye of the text, back from the bow, downward through the cloud, into the world of men, the reader stands eventually at the foot of a hill outside a wall, where centuries later, in the same theology, a man would be lifted on wood with his arms in the shape of the bow itself, and the arrow that did not strike the earth would find its place in his side. The text is not arguing for this image. The text only hangs the bow, points it away from the earth, and lets the centuries do their work. Noah, standing at the altar with the smoke still rising, did not see all of this. He saw color in the cloud. He heard a voice. He heard the promise that the waters would not again become a Mabel to destroy all flesh. Genesis 9:11. He heard that seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night, should not cease. Genesis 8:22. That was promise enough for one morning. He bowed his head. The smoke from the altar rose straight up, almost into the bow itself, and was absorbed in the cloud. Chapter 13, a door that is still knocking the flood. In the calendar Noah kept on his clay tablet, lasted 1 year and 10 days. It began on the 17th day of the second month of his 600th year, Genesis 7:11. It ended on the 27th day of the second month of the year after, Genesis 8:14. The dates are exact. They are exact in a way that other ancient flood stories are not. There is a smaller exactness inside the larger one. The ark rested on the mountains of Ararat on the 17th day of the 7th month, Genesis 8:4. The flood had begun on the 17th day of the second month, the same day of the month. 5 months later, the ark settled on the mountain. Some readers later have done a careful piece of counting. The 7th month of the civil calendar, after Israel left Egypt, would become the first month of the liturgical year, the month called Nisan, Exodus 12:2. If that later reckoning is read back into the older story, and the reading is offered with proper care by some commentators, rather than asserted as certain, then the day the ark rested is the same day of the month on which, in another spring many centuries later, an empty tomb would be found outside a city wall. It is a suggestive symmetry. Some readers find it persuasive, others are cautious. The text itself does not say so plainly, but the resonance is there. Quiet, like a chord that the ear catches without being told. The ark, in this reading, is not only a vessel, it is a rehearsal. Enter the ark to die a world. To leave the ark is to step into a creation that has been remade. 8 souls went in, 8 souls came out. Peter, writing much later, would notice the number and would compare the ark to baptism. 1 Peter 3:20-21. And would set the whole flood story under the sign of resurrection. The world remembered this story. The Sumerians told it with a different ark and a different name. In their account, the kings before the flood ruled for impossible spans of years, and the flood is the seam between 2 eras of kingship. The Babylonians wrote it on the 11th tablet of the Gilgamesh epic, with a hero called Utnapishtim, of vessels, animals and birds sent out to find dry land. The Greeks told it as the story of Deucalion and Pyrrha, the only ones spared by the gods to repopulate the world. Plato, in the Timaeus, has an Egyptian priest scold the Greeks for forgetting how often the world has been wiped clean. The Chinese remembered it in the figure of the Emperor Yu, who tamed the great waters at the beginning of the Xia dynasty. The Aztecs told the story of Tata and Nena. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia carried oral traditions of a great water that swallowed the land. The Inca remembered a flood from which Viracocha began the world again. None of these are the same story, but none of them is unaware of the story either. A reader of the Hebrew text need not insist on any one of these as direct memory. The text does not require it. The text only asks the reader to notice that the human family, scattered across the continents, kept telling the same shape. A world ruined by water, a vessel, a remnant, a new beginning. The shape is in the human mouth the way the dove was in Noah's hand, when he sent her out a 3rd time and she did not return. Genesis 8:12. After the flood, the text says something that is almost more troubling than the flood itself. The Lord said in his heart, "I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth." Genesis 8:21. The reason given for not flooding again is the same reason that had been given before the flood for flooding. Genesis 6:5. The wickedness has not been cured. The flood did not fix the human heart. The text knows this. The text says it openly. The waters washed the earth. They did not wash the imagination. Man came out of the ark with the same evil he had carried into it, and the Lord did not pretend otherwise. This is perhaps the most important sentence in the whole story. The flood is not enough. If the human heart is going to be healed, something more than water will be required. Something the flood cannot reach. The flood could end a world. It could not end a heart. And so the bow is hung in the cloud, and the string points toward the earth, and the long centuries begin in which the one who was grieved will work out a different answer, not by water, but by a different sort of door. There is a sentence at the end of the New Testament that is sometimes hung beside the flood story. "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come in to him and will sup with him and he with me." Revelation 3:20. The grammar of this door is different from the grammar of the ark's door. The ark's door was opened from the outside by a prophet for 100 years. It was sealed by the hand of the Lord when the time of grace had run out. After that it could not be opened. The verb sagar is not a verb that can be undone by knocking. The later door is the opposite. The later door is sealed from the inside. The knocking comes from outside, from one who will not break it down, who will not seize the latch by force, who will only stand and ask. The one inside is the one with the bolt now. The one inside is the one with the choice. For 100 years before the flood, a man stood inside a wooden door and invited the world to come in. Many centuries later, the one who closed that door is the one standing outside another, and the door this time is the human heart. Noah, on the morning he stepped out onto Ararat, did not know any of this. He stood on a mountain that was still wet, in the smell of clean rock and broken cedar, and he saw the bow in the cloud. He did not analyze it. He did not write a treatise. He went down to where his wife was waiting with the animals, and they began the long, slow work of starting over. The text leaves him there. It does not give him a heroic last speech. It will, in a few chapters, give him a vineyard and a moment of failure and a death. Genesis 9:20-29. Because the text is honest about its righteous men. But the flood story itself ends with smoke rising from a small altar, and a bow in a cloud, and the breath of 8 people on a mountain that had been, until very recently, under 7 meters of water. The breath of life had been withdrawn from a world. It had been kept, against everything, in 8 pairs of lungs. From those 8, the text says, the whole earth was overspread. Genesis 9:19. The door, somewhere, is still knocking. Whether it is opened this time is not the prophet's choice. It is the choice of the one inside.